I was really hoping to start shooting some of this video here during my work week over the last couple days, but definitely didn't get around to do it. And today, I have some time, although the wife is out running a couple errands, so we might hear a couple kids in the background. But any which way, part 2 on approaches. Let's fly the final approach course, see how it looks. My name's William. Welcome to Cleared Approach. Hello everybody, welcome to the channel where we talk about flight simulation and air traffic control procedures. My name is William. I stream virtual air traffic control services on the VATSIM network over on Twitch. You can find me down in the links below. Come and join us. We have a great time, great conversations, both of course about what we just said and or just life in general. Just have a good time and hang out over it. Really enjoyable. As always, what we're going to be talking about today is for simulation purposes only and is for procedures in the United States. So if you're here for last week's video, we were talking about the ILS-6 into Birmingham. We were just using that as an example, but pretty much teaching you how to be able to read any of these charts and how to go from the en route environment down to the approach itself. And so we discussed how we go from Neji onto the final, how we get from Vulcan to McDinn to final, and from Brookwood, which last week I kept calling Oakbrook. I don't know why, I'm sorry, but Brookwood onto the final approach course. This week, we're going to talk about, now that you're on the final approach course, where do we go from here? Let's finish reading the rest of this chart and know how we're going to fly this for your next flight. Okay, since we're talking about the final approach course, there's one important thing which I want you to determine right away. And that is, what is the final approach fix? So go ahead and take a few seconds, look at this chart, tell me what is the final approach fix. Okay, this one's kind of a trick question because there's actually two final approach fixes on this chart. And that's because this is two charts. This is an ILS approach and it's also a localizer approach. So there's two different ones, one for each one. The first one we have, let's talk about the ILS because that's what many are going to want to be flying. The ILS, the final approach fix, is indicated by the lightning bolt here on the chart. So on the ILS, when you reach 2,200 feet on the glide slope, is the final approach fix. If you're flying the localizer only, the non-precision, that is indicated by the iron crosshairs, which you can see here on the profile view at McDinn. So, precision approach, ILS, indicated by the lightning bolt. Non-precision, localizer approach, ended by the iron crosshairs, McDinn. Okay, I first wanted to identify the final approach fix because that is going to be our end point of this first segment. This first segment, we're going to pick up where we left off last week, where we're coming in from Brookwood or Neji, and then to Gufflow, and then inbound to the final approach fix, and or from McDinn to the final approach fix. I know McDinn's the final approach. We'll get to that. Don't worry. Just sit with me for 1 second. Let's start with the simple one where we first started with last week, coming from Brookwood and Neji. So if we remember from last week, from Brookwood and Neji, we've now made our way to Gufflow. We're still at 3,000 feet because that's what the previous MEA was to get to Gufflow. From Gufflow, here's what we're going to do. We're going to intercept the localizer. Track it inbound, 058 course. We're going to fly it for 5.5 miles, and during this time, we can descend down to 2,600. You can see it's published right here as the MEA. Okay, now the more difficult one, that's coming in from McDinn. If you remember from last week, we made it from Vulcan to McDinn. We're at 3,100 feet, and we're just now passing over McDinn, the outer marker and initial approach fix. Oh, by the way, it is also the final approach fix. We already talked about that, but here's the problem. We're kind of flying in the wrong direction. Remember, we're on a 162 course inbound to McDinn, and the final approach course is a 158. So here's what we need to do. We need to fly what's known as a procedure turn. How we're going to fly this procedure turn is by first joining the localizer, except the other way, away from the airport. We're going to join the localizer and fly a 238 course away from the airport. And we're going to do this until we at least pass Sempo. And then after Sempo, we can begin the procedure turn. Now it's simply just going to be a couple turns for a course reversal. We're going to start with a 45-degree right turn. It's going to be a 2-8-3 heading. We're going to fly that for 1 minute, then perform a left 180-degree turn to a 1-0-3 heading. That 1 minute turn, based on standard rated turns, should take us 1 minute on the turn. Then we're going to fly back inbound for a little bit less than 1 minute because the distance is slightly shorter on the 1-0-3 until we re-establish and re-intercept the localizer outside of SIMPO. From that point, we can then track the localizer back inbound. During this procedure turn, you can see here in the profile view, after McDin, which has the MEA at 3,100 feet, we can drop down to 2,700 feet from the point after McDin to SIMPO and then during the procedure turn. Once we get back established on the localizer, we can drop down to the 2,200 feet, as you can see is indicated here on the chart. Okay, there's one point I want to make sure that I'm really not confusing you guys on, and a couple other things to note. First, let's talk about the altitudes. When I'm talking about these altitudes, they are minimum altitudes. You do not have to fly level 1 altitudes. That 3,000 feet from Brookwood all the way to Guffalo, you don't have to fly that level at 3,000. You could cross Brookwoods, I don't know, at 8,000 feet. Doesn't really matter, and track it all the way down. You just can't go below 3,000. Now, what you do want to do is make sure you plan your descent, and this is going to be different for everybody that are in different types of aircraft, as they have different performance characteristics. But you want to make sure you plan your descent based on your airspeed and your rate of descent. That way, you intercept the glide slope from underneath of the glide path, and at an altitude no later than 2,200 feet, there where the final approach fix is. If you do intercept the glide slope at a higher altitude than 2,200, just ensure that you do continue to remain above the MEAs that are posted on the chart before then. Don't just rely on the signal to keep you safe. Make sure you're also referencing the chart to ensure that you're not going below certain altitude. Okay, the next thing to know is if we're not a GPS aircraft, how do we find all these fixes? How do we determine where Guffalo is and SIMPO is? It's very simple. You can see there's reference marks on here, and they're all based off the Vulcan vortex. So we know we're on Guffalo when we're established on the localizer, and we cross over the Vulcan 198 radio. This will require you to have both nav radios running, one on the localizer established and tracking inbound, the other one to use simply as a reference to see when you cross the Vulcan 198 radio and 16 DME, by the way. That's when you know you're at Guffalo and you can drop down to the next altitude. Same thing for SIMPO. We know we reach SIMPO when we've crossed the 182 radio of Vulcan, as you can see on the chart right here. And with McDin, not only do you have both a reference line and a course to McDin off the Vulcan radio, but of course it's an outer marker NDB itself. You can just tune to the frequency of 224 and watch your ADF needle flip from one side to the other to indicate that you have crossed over McDin. Great, now we've made it to the final approach fix. From here, we're going to take it on down into the airport. Things we're going to be referencing mostly are going to be on the profile section down here underneath. First of all, after the final approach fix, if you're on the localizer only, you can continue your descent down to minimums. If you're on the ILS, you're going to track that glide slope down to your minimums, to your decision altitude. These altitudes are published at the very bottom, and it depends on your category of aircraft on which one you're going to use. Okay, the first thing that we're going to have to know when we're looking at this land-in minimums tables is our category. And we're going to determine this based on our VREF speed. Your VREF speed is something you'll have to calculate in your aircraft. You'll have to reference your own aircraft documents in order to determine this. Not something we're going to heavily cover in this video. But once you know your VREF speed, then you can determine what your category is. You can see these categories here at the bottom, A, B, C, and D. There also is a category E as well. So they are category A, a VREF speed less than 91 knots. B, between 91 knots but less than 121. C, 121 knots less than 141 knots. D, 141 knots but less than 166. And lastly, if there's a category E, 166 knots or more for a VREF speed. Now that you determined your category, we can then look below to figure out what our minimum altitude is based on what type of approach we're shooting. Okay, now that we know our category, we can determine what our minimum altitude is going to be. For an ILS, it's going to be referred to as a decision altitude. It's going to be the point of which you execute the missed approach if it comes to that. The decision altitude or the minimum altitude do not go below. No circumstances do not go below unless you have visual with the airport where you can continue the approach visually. In this case, the ILS runway 6, fairly easy because it's the same for all 6 categories A through E, 806 feet. The second number here, the 18, is the RVR value that we must have in order to execute this approach. That is 1,800 feet. It's in hundreds of feet. 1,800 feet. If you see single digit numbers, like for example, if you see 1 and 1/2, that would be using visibility when the airport doesn't have RVR equipment to measure visibility down on the runway in feet. So if you see like a 1 and 1/2, then you need 1 and 1/2 statute mile visibility reported on weather in order to execute this approach. The second number, the 200, is the height above touchdown in elevation. So at 806 feet, we're going to be 200 feet above touchdown. 200 is pretty standard for ILSs. Most ILSs that I'm familiar with take you down to 200 feet for a standard category. There are category 2s and category 3s that take you to lower altitudes. We won't really quite touch into that here on this particular one. So the last number, the 1 in parentheses, these are for military, reference military regulations for these. These are not for civil pilots in parentheses. So again, 806 minimum decision altitude, 1,800, we need at least 1,800 RVR to execute this approach, and 200, we're going to be 200 feet above touchdown elevation when we reach 806 feet. Down below this, you can see the minimums for the localizer runway 6. Now, because we do not have vertical guidance on a localizer, this is not going to be your missed approach point. We're simply going to descend to these altitudes and hold this altitude until we can continue to the airport visually. And then if we cannot continue it visually, we're going to fly the missed approach at the missed approach point, cover that next. So on the localizer runway 6, categories A and B, 1,160 feet. And you need RVR, 2,400 feet. This will take you down to a point of 554 feet above ground. In the next section, you can see that the minimum altitude is the same, 1,160. However, you need a 6,000 foot RVR if you're in a category C, D, or E aircraft. Again, it takes you down to the same height above touchdown, 554 feet. Okay, now of course, let's also don't forget to reference the top of the page that we did last week's video at the very top. So it again says that for an in-op airport lighting system, the standard ILS 6 category E visibility RVR to 4,000. So if you're category E aircraft, you need to bump that 1,800 up to 4,000 feet RVR if the airport lighting system is currently in-op. For the localizer 6, if the airport lighting system is in CATs C, D, and E, you need to increase this RVR value to a visibility of 1 and 5/8 statute mile visibility. And if you're category E, can't even shoot this approach. By the way, this really may not be applicable to flight sim, but just reference your own flight simulation scenery on what's there, as well as if you're simulating the use of real world NOTAMs. Missed approach points, let's talk about that one. We already talked about it on the ILS. If you're tracking the glide slope down, as soon as you reach this altitude of 806 feet, that is your decision altitude. That is where you're going to make your final decision on whether you continue or if you execute the missed approach. For the localizer, since we don't have any vertical guidance that's keeping us on track on the descent, then we could be descending a little bit earlier, we could be descending a little bit later than what that standard glide path is. We're simply going to hold the minimum altitude until we reach a missed approach point, which we can see on this point. You can see on the very bottom right of the airport diagram, the final approach fix to the missed approach point. This is 4.5 miles. If we have a GPS, we can simply use that. If we do not, then we need to use time. We will use the knots that we're flying on final, which should be the same as your VREF speed, and then we're going to start a clock when we pass over the final approach fix. If we are doing 90 knots on final, at 3 minutes is when we're going to execute the published missed approach. If we're flying 120 knots, Then at 2 minutes and 15 seconds is when we are going to fly the published missed approach. Now, of course, your VREF speeds may not be these exact numbers, 60, 90, 120, etc. But these are just going to be good references for you to determine when you're going to reach that missed approach point and when you should execute the missed approach. This particular approach also helps us out with the use of an inner marker. You can see that indicated on the plan view as well as the profile view with the IM indication. And that inner marker is going to light up a light inside your cockpit to indicate that you're over it, giving you also another reference for your missed approach point. You can see in this case that the inner marker is located 1/10 of a mile away. And if you look at, again, that the missed approach point on the localizer is 4.5 miles, then you know that you're 1/10 of a mile away from your missed approach point once you hit that inner marker. All right, let's move on to our missed approach. We're going to go back up to the top right. It's simply going to spell it out, and then our plan view is also going to give us a good pictorial view of it as well. This says, climb to an altitude of 2,000 feet, then turn left to 3,000, direct the Vulcan Vortac, and hold. So climb straight ahead to 2,000 feet. After you reach 2,000 feet, you can begin your turn direct to the Vulcan Vortac, but continue that climb all the way to 3,000. Then once you reach Vulcan, you can go ahead and apply your holding procedures to get established and maintain a hold over Vulcan on the 226 degree course inbound, which is also on the 46 radial, as you can see here in the plan view. This particular approach as well also has a missed approach point. That would be something to be assigned by ATC if needed. Well, just as we were trying to finish that video, the kids decided to go ahead and lose it. And here we are now on day 2 of shooting this video. That's okay, we only have one last thing to cover, and that's basically just to say goodbye. Hopefully you really appreciate the information here that we talked about on approaches, and now have a better understanding of how to read these approach charts and appropriately apply them on your next VATSIM flight. And when you do it, make sure you come join us over on the stream. I stream on Twitch, VATSIM Air Traffic Control Services. Come over and join us. We have a great time over there. Of course, if you have any questions, I'm also available over on Twitter at any time. I'll be more than happy to answer you over there, as well as our Discord has plenty of community members which are also willing to partake in helping you answer some of your flight sim and air traffic control questions that you may have. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure you drop a quick like and subscribe over here to the YouTube channel, because we'd love to see you back on our next one. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for watching Cleared Approach. You know, hold on. I got an idea. Hang tight. Chuggly, here's what we can do. Let's set this thing to follower only mode. I didn't even think about that. Then everybody's like, oh crap. Now you must get these follows in. Ha ha ha.